Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Awaken Empowered podcast. I'm Micheila Sheldan. I'm here with Ethann Fox. And in today's very intense age of ascension, we have a lot of hard decisions to make. Some of us are so ingrained in these spiritual topics, conversations, and modalities. Others are not, but we have a lot of information being thrown at us. And it's hard for us to sometimes discern whether or not we need to filter through the critical mind what we're receiving, or through pure spiritual inspiration and intuition. And so we thought we'd tackle this topic today. How real is our reality, and where are we at as spiritual beings in terms of being able to transmute things and being able to really judge where we're at in terms of our ascension process. One of the most controversial topics that has recently been all over social media has to do with the Schumann frequency. And we wanted to bring this topic up because I think there's so many different ways that we can look at this. But the bottom line is, we've got a lot of information coming out about things that people are jumping to conclusions on. And if we go back to the book, if you're reading it, or some of the channelings that I've done on YouTube, the guides talk about the Schumann in terms of our resonant connection, meaning we are here on a physical planet attempting to reunite in oneness. And oneness is what the Schumann resonance is truly all about. So from a purely spiritual and channeled perspective, the guides say that the core of Mother Earth is like an acoustic sounding board. Every living being that exists on planet Earth, whether it's a plant, an animal, an insect, a human, is contributing its vibration to that sounding board. And it is being echoed back at a certain level for us to receive, which is really an interesting concept if you think about it, because it goes along with the idea that we don't really need a quote unquote critical mass in order to ascend. What we need is a group of humans vibrating so high and living their life in alignment with their spiritual truths that their vibration is going to be sent out in compensation of those who are not. So we're giving everyone around us the opportunity to ascend as we create our lives to all of the things that we are learning. But if you purely look at the Schumann resonance on an hour-to-hour, day-by-day, minute-to-minute basis, we can say it's been pretty chaotic in terms of the movement. Now, certainly we had this really wonky pattern that we found out may have been a technology glitch. But I want to talk in general first about what we're truly seeing in all of the chaos. If we look at the world today and everything that's happening on the surface of the earth, we're in the midst of some serious chaos, a lot of turbulence, dismantling of systems and structures that we manifested long ago that no longer match the people we're becoming. So we're going to see all of the energy of that transition, in my mind, the way the guides have explained it, in the Schumann resonance. And I think until we start to see some semblance of regularity or normalcy in it, we haven't really reached what people call the fifth dimension, which to me is just really a higher vibrational experience where we're all operating more in unity and as one. But that aside, it's interesting because we had people proclaiming that ascension was happening on a very rapid pace, just looking at that very short window of the Schumann. And then we had others that were claiming it was a technology glitch. And what the guides have taught me regarding consciousness is that we're moving at such a rapid pace on the planet that sometimes science, technology isn't necessarily keeping up with who we're becoming and what's actually taking place in the inner earth. That aside, we have to look at everything multidimensionally, which we have a really hard time doing. So as very linear, physical, material beings. It's typically a yes or no, black or white, one way or another, where they're asking us to pause, to consider all that we have become, all that we have learned, and not be very quick to draw conclusions. So in my mind, just from a purely spiritual standpoint, which I know there's a whole physical, scientific part of this, I don't think that we can judge what's going on the planet based on one day, 1 hour. We have to look around us and see the patterns and the trends of where we're steadily moving and how that ascension is playing out logically. Do we find ourselves in new systems, new structures, new communities that feel fifth dimensional? Are we given more options in terms of living our lives as human beings on planet Earth versus our sovereignty being taken away? So these are the things we have to critically look at, I think, using the mind, in addition to the more spiritual definitions and channel definitions that we're getting from the guides.
Yeah, what I'd like to bring to the conversation today, I think, is that more rational, intellectual side of things, because I think that's often missed in the spiritual community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to have both. And as somebody who has walked both and walks both all the time these days, I find that that's really lacking. So even as an example, as I prepare for our channel revelation shows, I watch videos and read lots of books, and some of the books and videos that I will read or watch are from the purely left brain scientific side of things or the academic side of things. And that's what, in all these topics that we're going to address here today, I find that there is a discrepancy between both sides. Both sides think they're right and the other side is wrong. And I think both sides are right, but they're unable to see the other side's viewpoint. So as an example, on the Schumann resonance space, I've watched videos from the more scientific, intellectual side, and they poke fun at the spiritual community because, they say things like, no, we're not going to enter the fifth dimension because of whatever is going on in the Schumann. And then they proceed to explain how the Schumann frequencies are displayed on the graphs that we see online all the time. And they are right in their scientific assessment of what they're talking about. But their closed-mindedness to the spiritual and metaphysical concepts or the fifth dimension or higher dimensions makes them lose out on part of the understanding. And so they may be very logical and rational and correct about their scientific assessments, but because they're unable to comprehend the spiritual concepts, they have no idea what the spiritual community is talking about or what everybody gets into an uproar about every time the Schumann graph shows some anomaly. But from a scientific standpoint, they can explain all of those things very rationally in a very level-headed way. And on the spiritual side, I see the opposite happening, which is every time some weird thing happens on the Schumann graph, everybody freaks out and thinks we're ascending to the fifth dimension, when there's no understanding of the scientific aspects of what's actually happening in that graph and what the Schumann frequency even is. I'm willing to bet that the majority of people don't actually even know what's being displayed on those graphs. And so when you don't know that, then all you're seeing is a pretty picture that moves around, and every time it looks different, we make up, our own rationals or our own stories about what it means, when the scientific community has an entirely opposite viewpoint. And I think this is the problem that I see. Not that it's a problem, but for us to really walk in this world, we have to walk down the middle. We have to consider both viewpoints, and we have to bring them together in one understanding. And that's what I have to do for all the shows that we do for Channel Revelations. I have to understand the academic side, the scientific side, and bring it together with the spiritual side and see where they meet, and that's where the truth is. And So I think that's something we have to consider, just like the recent anomaly that you're talking about in the Schumann graph. The scientific community or the academic community that's studying it already knew that there was something. Some of them who are a little bit more open-minded assumed that it was some sort of technology that was turned on around the planet that was causing a disturbance in the electromagnetic frequency or the radiation around the planet, and that's what it was reading. None of them made the conclusion that we're ascending to the fifth dimension, but so they had that conclusion, right? And some of them suggested that maybe it was a glitch. So in this case, they were more right than in the spiritual community. And if in the spiritual viewpoint, we don't consider those other possibilities and really think about which one it makes sense or makes the most sense, or it could be this, but maybe it's also that, or it could be that. So then we tend to jump to conclusions, I think, one way or another, whether it's on the scientific academic side where they jump to the conclusion that spirituality is hogwash, or on the spiritual side where we don't even consider scientific because we think they don't know what they're talking about. And as a result, we can make up things that may not be true, that may later be proven, to have been false. So I think that's where we need to look at both. And so we'll do that on all the different topics we're talking about today.
Yeah, and I want to also, just as someone who's a channel and very deeply ingrained in the spiritual movement, talk about my feeling about this, because I know there are probably a lot of people out there who, immediately bought into this idea that the Schumann was showing us something, and we still don't know if it was or not. We don't know what it's showing us, to be honest, and maybe that will come to light. But what I want to speak to is the rationality of a spiritual journey, because for me as a channel, to do what I do took critical thinking out of the picture. So truly, in order to channel extraterrestrials or speak light language or do some form of energetic healing, you really have to get over that hump of trying to logically prove that something is actually happening, because there is no way to do that. So I do understand why, as spiritual beings, some in different circles may look at us as being more gullible in terms of falling for these, anomalies or whatever they are. Because I think that we've spent so many years trying to get out of our rational minds in order to accept all of the things that were happening to us and within us, that to actually go back that direction feels like we're going back in time and maybe even losing progress, that we've made so diligently, I think, in our ascension. But what the guides always allude to in the book is the expansion of consciousness, which offers us not only more options to work with, but a multi-dimensional reality, which I think for us on planet Earth is really hard to conceptualize, because we have been living in this very rational, third-dimensional, material, left-brained kind of society where everything is just as it is. And then awakening to the fact that it really is, reality really isn't what we thought it was. And now we're in a period of time where we're attempting to balance that. So when we talk about spiritual embodiment, I think that's what this truly is. It's us learning how to work with a new and higher level of consciousness where we can be experiencing both worlds simultaneously, where there is a physical, tangible, material reality that I believe we were purposely meant to experience and drawn to and chose, but also a part of us that's becoming so oriented to the non-physical that we might have a hard time putting them both into any balance or semblance of use.
Yeah, see, I don't actually have a hard time rationalizing channeling. So,
Right.
so I'm very different in that viewpoint. Yeah. I can rationalize channeling very well. And I think that's the point I'm trying to make is you have to get to a place where you can take a spiritual thing or a metaphysical idea or practice like channeling and be able to bring intellectual thought into it and rationalize it. And because of that, I can look at 10 different channels and I can tell you which ones are really channeling authentically. And, not everybody's at the same level of talent in any field. So I can look at that and make rational decisions. That's why I don't follow a lot of other channels, because I think most people out there, they're not channeling as authentically. And so you have to be able to discern that. Otherwise, you'll believe everything every channel says without any level-headed thinking. And I think you have to bring that into it. On a side note, one of the YouTube channels I watch when I prepare for shows or just in general is a show that's called Esoterica, and it's this PhD academic who talks about metaphysical topics. And so he talks about a lot of the ancient practices and Kabbalah and whatnot, and he makes fun of channeling. So here's somebody who believes in all that other stuff, Kabbalah, magic, etc. He makes videos about a lot of the ancient teachers and Egyptology and whatever, yet he makes fun of channeling. So this is the issue that I see. People on the academic side cannot move over to the spiritual side and understand and be able to bring that rational thought into channeling or different spiritual ideas. And people on the spiritual side who are very much have adopted the idea of channeling will believe anything that anybody says.
Right.
I'm not a channel, but I could tomorrow start a YouTube channel, if nobody knew who I was anyway, and I could pretend like I'm channeling, and I would probably build a bigger audience than I have now, because people will believe anybody who says they're a channel. And I think that either side is going to lead you astray. On the academic side, not being able to rationalize or be able to understand channeling, you're missing a whole world of reality. You're missing half of everything. But if you're also on the spiritual side and you buy into anything without that rational, level-headed perspective, then you're missing a whole lot of everything, or you're believing in things that may just be made up, or people who think they're channeling who are not, or maybe even channeling dark entities or whatever. We have to bring that level-headedness, I think, into everything that we do. Both sides have to come together in society for us to live in a better world. So that would be my viewpoint on that. Now, on another note, when I am talking about academia and science, I want to clarify that I'm not referring to propaganda. There's a difference. So the last few years, academia and science were on one side of the whole vaccine virus conversation, and propaganda and government was on the other side. So when I say science and academia, I'm referring to the people who are really doing the work out there, who are the actual experts. But most people didn't know who those were because they were censored over the last few years. Whereas what we were hearing in mainstream media is not science and it's not academia. It's propaganda for the purpose of pushing forward a message that everybody, they want everyone to adopt. So that's another area where we have to be discerning again. So really, we can't live in the world today without thinking. If we accept everything that's told to us by anybody without any kind of critical thinking, then we'll buy into the propaganda, which will lead us to making poor choices, which we later will regret, or we'll buy into the spiritual ideas and we'll believe in things that may not be true, that somebody's making up, or maybe they're well-intentioned, they're just not very good at whatever it is they're doing. And so that rational thought has to be there, and we have to be willing to put in the work to research both sides thoroughly enough, especially when it comes to subject areas that may have a big impact on our life or the world that we live in. Like, for example, do you get a vaccine or not? And to make that decision, that's a life-changing decision. And it's a decision that warrants doing the research and to go outside of what you're being told to be able to fully understand the conversation and the topic and to understand the real science, the real medical part of it, to put together the ideas. Because in the decade that we're in, we're going to see an immense amount of propaganda and to move us as a society in a particular direction, to believe in certain things that the mainstream and the world leaders want us to believe. So if we are too lazy and don't put in the effort to do that personal research and to look at all sides and make a level-headed decision, then we're going to be led astray continually throughout the entire decade and find ourselves in a place we don't want to be.
I think sometimes we don't even have to go looking for it. I know you're a huge researcher, and I used to be, as well. I still am to some degree, but because I'm channeling, I stay away from a lot of that stuff. And miraculously, what I find oftentimes is that the guides will lead me back to it, or there's something in academia that comes out, a video that just synchronistically aligns with exactly what the guides are saying. And the guides are always putting it in more, I think, conscious terms than what here on planet Earth, we're speaking. But at the same time, all of the same things are there. So as a consumer of information, I think it's a little bit different than actually being the one who's providing it as a channel. That's just my experience, right? Because you cannot have any rational thought in your mind when you're going into a channeled event. But nonetheless, in my life as a human being and someone who is making decisions at a time on planet Earth when we are bombarded by so much propaganda and so much fear, we have to have our feet on the ground and be able to work both sides of it. And that comes into, I can tell you, almost every channeled session, in every question really that's asked in a channeled session about health or money, or the world. The guides are always giving us both sides of the equation and saying, well, here are the vibrational ramifications, considerations that you have to be thinking about. Here are the physical. And I don't think they would do that if we were at a point in our evolution where we could just say, well, we're going to spiritualize it all away. And we get a lot of comments on some of the videos we've done about transmuting the vaccine. And I think that's a really big topic. And, I first want to say, I believe as human beings to have signed up to come in as a soul in this timeline, we're all here pushing the envelope on all of these old programs. So, whether it's big pharma, whether it's GMO food, disease, all of these things, we're not here. If we were here to spiritualize it all away, we wouldn't have chosen bodies. So the very idea that we would make a decision that we know is inherently bad for us and then attempt to use some modality to rid it from the body negates the idea of a divine plan, that we would have come with some greater purpose to leave behind a legacy for others. Now, it's not to say that we don't awaken after we make a decision and want to go back and change things. But yet I don't think 100% from a purely spiritual standpoint, and this is somebody who's channeling for my life purpose, that we could do that yet. Now, we have a great many examples on planet Earth, teachers who have miraculously healed themselves. We have the placebo effect. I totally believe in all of those things. But I don't think it's any one practice that we could ever buy into that would pull everything out of the body. Because if we're meant to have some evolutionary process, and we talk about this a lot with the numerology, the astrology, even going back to past episodes, if we're meant to learn something, to understand ourselves better, to make different choices, no spiritual practice or process is going to take away our pain, the toxins, the disease before it's time. So the very idea that we want to do this puts us back in that third dimensional realm of control, which I think spirituality is attempting to break us out of as human beings,
Well, I want to address that point because I think it's important. And is it possible? About transmuting whatever, right? Are we powerful beings? Yes. Can we transmute anything? Yes. But meaning we have that potential in us.
Yes.
Right. But just like I'm not going to try to channel tomorrow because I know I'm no good at it. Right? It's not something that I'm here to do, and I'm not talented at it. I could make stuff up. Maybe people would even believe me if I made stuff up, but I'd still be making it up. So my point is that we're not all equally developed in every area, right? There are Buddhist monks who can transmute anything. They can levitate objects. They can increase their body temperature, and even sitting out in the cold, in the snow, they can do all kinds of things. And sure, there are probably some out there who could drink a glass of poison and transmute it. I'm sure that there are. But if I were to hand any of you a glass of poison and say, here, drink this, you can transmute it, I would bet that none of you would take me up on that offer because you know, at least rationally to some degree, that you're not at the development level at this point to be able to do that. And if you were, you probably wouldn't be watching this show. Now, maybe there are some of you out there who could do that. So there are always exceptions. But on the whole, the level of spiritual development in the global consciousness at the moment on the planet is not at a point where we could transmute those things. If it was, then these things wouldn't even be happening on planet Earth right now. If the consciousness of the entire planet at this point was at a level where we could drink poison and transmute it to where it has absolutely no harm on our body, then we wouldn't be living in a dystopian world where vaccines and viruses and these issues were even occurring, because the consciousness would be far beyond that reality even existing. So by saying we can make poor choices and simply transmute those choices, I think is avoiding the reality of making better choices. We just have to start to, realize that those choices do impact our physical body to some degree or another. If I were to, for example, hold my breath right now, I wouldn't be able to do it for very long without passing out. So there's some mechanics in the physical body that are just rules or structures that I have to follow in order to exist in this reality. Now, are there people in the world who can hold their breath and never breathe? I'm sure there are. And in fact, that was one of the Buddhist practices we talked about in a previous Channel Revelation show. And I actually breathe very little compared to most people, but even still, I couldn't hold my breath. So we're all at different levels. And I think while in theory, we are amazing beings and we have immense potential, and had we been living in a world today where those abilities were nurtured from birth, then yes, we may all be at a point where we could drink poison and transmute it and it would have no effect on us. But that's not the world that we're living in, and most of us are not at that level. So I think we have to be careful when we make those kinds of decisions, because there are certain physical rules and structures in our reality that sort of allow us to have the experience that we came here to have. And so I think making better decisions is important.
Yeah, I think in this timeline, what we're learning is that the body is a spiritual vehicle. And that is not only our lesson as human physical souls, but the legacy that we're leaving behind. Because I agree with you. I think if we were at a certain level of enlightenment as a collective, these things would not exist. And they still exist because they're here to teach us to return to the earth and to actually connect in that valuable way that the ancients once did. So if we allow fear to creep in and we make these, decisions that are harmful for us based on the premise that we can use our spiritual practice to get rid of them, we're actually negating our higher purpose in it all. But also, I think as a collective, we have to frame that in more of a dimensional way, because what the guides say, for example, is you might be able to reach the 7th dimension. When I channel the Council of Light, we're telepathically exchanging at a 12th dimensional level. But that doesn't mean as a human physical soul that I'm living in the 12th dimension 24/7. I wish I was, but that's just absolutely not the case. And the reason for that is I'm a part of a collective, and there's only so much of that dimensional energy we can hold individually without somehow being affected by the world around us. And that's what our spiritual practice is for. It opens us up to greater bandwidths of information and support so that we can be in bodies and then actually make very conscious and mindful decisions. But the other thing that we also have to consider is that from a physical standpoint, our material is changing very, very radically. So in many of the channel transmissions, like the courses that I've recently done, I think the Secret Code 22 was a brilliant one on the physical body. The guides alluded to the fact that the more we meditate and the more we practice our, spiritual modalities, the more sensitive our bodies are going to become to our environment. So that's why, as a spiritual community, I think we're having such a hard time with things like disease and, transmuting toxins. It's not because we're meant to suffer. It's because we are far more sensitive now than we ever have been before to any little thing. And I notice that about myself, which is why I'm so drawn to living a certain kind of a lifestyle, because I know if I get out of range of that, my body is not going to be happy. And if my body's not happy, I can't do my spiritual work. So they interface, right? They go hand in hand. And that's where I think many people are missing the greater point is we can't negate and neglect the body in the choices that we're making on the physical earth and then expect to move into a higher dimension, because all of that material, whether it's the body or whatever else we've created, it has to come along with us on that ascendant journey. And if it is material, which we know is energy, it's got to transform, but it transforms at all levels. So I think at the cellular level, at the DNA level, all of that alchemizes as we make the right choice. So
I want to sort of touch on several of the topics that we just brought up, but in the context of how do I go about bringing these ideas into a grounded form? As you said, channeling, for you, you have to throw out the rational mind. But I don't do that. Now, I'm not a channel, of course. Now, in your case, you may need to do that. But for example, when all of the things were happening a few years ago, and the news was all about everybody's dying and hospitals are full to the brim, that was what's going on in the news. And we drove by a few hospitals in our area just to see if that was true, right? And the parking lots were empty. And so for me, this does not equal that, right? So I take the what's in the news, what's in the propaganda, and I try to validate it. Okay, if it's true, then hospitals should be full. It's just logic. It's just plain rational thinking, right? And so I did that in many different steps, many different ways. I might have had my underlying belief system, which I did have actually. My underlying belief system was that it wasn't, I didn't believe the viruses actually existed to begin with. And that was what I said from the very beginning. But just so I wasn't overly biased in my decision making, I wanted to validate it. Now, if I saw people hospitals were full, then I might be inclined to think, okay, well, maybe I need to reassess my opinion. Another thing my thought was, if everybody's dying, or so many people are, then I should at least know a few people in my family or friends or whatever, because at the volume of people who were being affected by this, there should have been at least a few. And I didn't know anybody at all who was affected. So again, it didn't make sense. So I validate everything that way. I look at what is the belief system, and then I look at what are the actual facts that I know. because facts that I know are things I can touch, that I can actually go out there and see and experience, instead of believing what somebody else says. Because anybody can say anything. These days, anybody can say anything on social media, and next thing you know, it goes viral and a million people believe it, even though it may or may not be true. In the same way, for example, channeling. If I validate your channeling by comparing it to what I know. So, for example, when we do our channel revelation shows, I come prepared with questions. You don't know what they are. But I've already done the research, and the research is largely based on academic information that's out there. And so I know these things are true. And then if you channel information that's contradictory to what I know is true, or at least what there is enough evidence to support being true, because with ancient civilizations, we don't really know for sure, but we may know enough. And if what you're channeling is completely out of left field, then that invalidates the channeling. And this is how I look at different channels. For example, if a channel were to say that, which, there are channels out there who do this, right? Who talk about the Council of whatever, I can't remember. What was that one?
You're talking about the Galactic Federation?
The Galactic Federation, yeah. We talk about how the Galactic Federation is fighting a war and we're all saved. Well, okay, I want to believe it, okay? But then I look at what is the current state of the world. If this is true, then we should see more peace on Earth. We should see our governments going in a more positive, enlightened direction. We should see more harmony among people, closer relationships. So I try to validate, because if this is true, then this should be true. And if I saw that, then I would be inclined to say, okay, they're right. And so this is how I validate channeling, because anybody can say anything. And some channeling, I also look at what is the nature of the person. Is the information being presented in a not egocentric way? They're just presenting the information. What they know is true, even whether it's true or not. I look at the person and who they are and how they present. And based on that, that's another factor that I consider. So these are different things. When I met Barb, as an example, and she likes to tell this story about how when I first met her, she was commenting on my aura, and well, I'm skeptical. So I want to believe it. I want to believe what she said about my energy field. But at the same time, I didn't even know who she was at that point. And so I brought her, into my conference room, and I took things that I could validate. Different Ormus samples, different samples of water, things that I had charged up, things that I hadn't. She had no idea what was what. Pictures of different spiritual gurus or spiritual masters, none of whom she knew. So I was expecting a certain kind of answer. And if she gave me that kind of response, each time she did, it would show me, okay, she really is, who she says she is. She really is seeing auras. And so I could take somebody like her, instead of believing what she says she is, I can validate it using what I know and using rational thinking. And that is how I arrive at this middle place where I can take spiritual concepts and spiritual practices, or like channeling or aura reading, and combine it with some rational, level-headed thinking and come up with a result. I did the same thing with energy transfers in the beginning. I didn't believe that I had any sort of an ability, but there were unusual things that happened in my life, of course, but I always dismissed those as random. But when I started doing this in groups, I was very skeptical of myself. And how I validated it was people started having all kinds of unusual experiences, and people, there were different kinds of tests that were done on me from various people in the beginning. And so I collected that information, and it provided some rationalization to what was going on, so that I wasn't just believing in something that wasn't really there. And sometimes I would work with energy a certain way and have Barb study my aura, and I would do things to see, could she see what I was doing? Or what was actually happening, or that I thought was happening. So it's really not a matter of bringing in facts as much as a certain way of thinking and processing the environment that we're in that allows us the ability to rationalize or bring more level-headedness or groundedness into the spiritual space, and to bring more spirituality or consciousness, I should say, into the academic or scientific space. Because the truth is in the middle. I mean, same's true for, like, for example, the idea of chemistry. Chemistry is actually an inferior version of alchemy. But scientists and chemists think, they've got the answers, and alchemy is just pseudoscience. But they are actually working with an inferior form of science, but they think it's a superior form, right? And this is the problem in society today. The spiritual side thinks the other side is crazy, and the scientific side thinks the spiritual side is crazy, and in the end, we both miss out. If we could get together, we could produce, advance a lot farther than we are as two siloed individuals.
Yeah, as a channel myself, what I notice about my work and what I follow in others is when a channel is validating something that we already know, but raising it up to a higher level. So, what I think the guides do is they take concepts and things that we've already been introduced to, and they want to expand those and to help us believe more in what we know to be true, which I think is different, across the board. So we have to give everyone the leeway to be able to tune in to who, they've become and what they know, and to interact with channels on those various levels. The red flag for me is the fantasy or the overnight change. We're going to have a solar flash that's going to happen and change the world in 2 hours. We're going to, it's done. Everyone's, the government's going to jail. We've got ET ships shooting out military planes in the sky. Maybe some of that's happening. We don't know. But I think in order to really embody in spiritual truth, we have to simplify and bring it closer to the earth. And like you said, observe what we see actually happening in reality. Now, from time to time in my channeling, the guides will actually give us a vibrational report on what's going on beneath the surface, on things that we don't understand. And I think that can be helpful as well. It's never prophesizing, however, about a certain outcome, because they're always quick to say that we as a collective are creators. So obviously, every decision that we make as an individual is contributing to a larger pool of energy that's moving us as a human race in the direction that we're going to go. So in any moment, they could give us a transmission about what's going on beneath the earth, and vibrationally, where are we at? Are we ascending? Are we not? They're very eloquent in how they put all of that, but also very quick to say that it can change in a moment's notice. So that's why I think it's good to not jump to conclusions. And in this very fast-paced energy that we're in, with all of the social media training that we've had that's brought our attention span down to almost nothing, we have to be really careful about making decisions about things, in snap judgments about things, because that actually narrows the field in which we are able to work within as conscious souls. So I know a lot of you who followed this podcast are doing meditative work and understand the idea of a coherent field. We have all that we need from an information standpoint at our fingertips. It doesn't always have to come from a channel. What happens with me a lot when I'm a regular meditator, when I'm dedicated, is that I find synchronicity. So synchronicity guides us to those people that maybe have been censored, that we need to understand and have the most valuable information for us at a time when we would have normally not found them, right? That's what we're going for, I think, is to create a coherent field so that we can both be spiritually guided while also intersecting with valid material information from academics or science that supports where we are in the moment, but leads us into something greater.
So I want to change the subject to more of the technology and how spiritual technologies are coming into the space so much these days. And for the most part, the new age spiritual technologies that are becoming available are extremely expensive. And I mean, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 plus for spiritual technologies. And so I've seen all kinds. We've had a lot of vendors even at our expo who had $7,000, $10,000, light pads and things like that, and or frequency generators, and it's easy to again want to believe in these things, just like 100 years ago there were people who were selling healing oils on the side of the street, and people bought into that too. I think we have to use a little bit of discernment in evaluating these things. Now, I have a somewhat of a background in technology just because as a child I was very much into electronics, and I went to school for electrical engineering as well. So I have a little bit more of a rational thought about those kind of things, and I think because getting back to the earlier point about we're amazing beings, and yes, we can transmute anything. But and I think at certain times the whole placebo effect it takes effect, which science calls it the placebo effect, but I think it's just simply at the right time. If the belief is there, then I think we can heal ourselves of anything. And I think a lot of people who are trying to heal a particular illness, they may try for years, and all of a sudden the planetary alignments are just how they need to be, and they may try that one thing that happens to work in that moment. It wasn't really that one thing that they tried, it just happened to be the timing was right, and then they tried the one thing. Or in the trying of that one thing, they had the belief that it would work to heal them, and therefore it does. Doesn't mean that one thing actually did anything, right? And I think that's what we have to consider when evaluating spiritual technologies. I mean, anything really, but we're talking about spiritual technologies because anybody can make a claim. I could make a light bed too, and I could say this light bed will cure anything, and 100 people will try it, and if they believe in me enough or believe in my marketing materials or message well enough, and I package it really nicely, everyone's going to believe that it works. But what I have to look at is what are the actual results. And so, there are a lot of things these days that I see, and even, for example, there is a very popular technology that's claiming to be a med bed that a lot of people have tried. And I've looked at it with my more rational electronics background, and I want to believe, that med beds are coming, and I do believe they are coming. But as technologies roll out, we have to be able to evaluate: is it worth it? If a med bed exists today, I'd be willing to find the money to pay $10,000 or $50,000 for it. But a med bed, in my mind, is a technology that cures anything. So all I have to do is go lay in it, turn it on, and maybe it has lights or frequencies or some combination thereof, and whatever I have is gone. And so if I were to use a med bed, I would expect 100% result, 100% of the time, or at least, I'd be willing to settle for 90% or 95%. Maybe the technology still has a ways to go, and so you expect a certain level of result, but maybe not 100% of the time. Now, on the other hand, if the technology promises relaxation or less stress or a good nap, then I would evaluate it based on that, and I would expect that result's going to be there 90% to 100% of the time. So if a company comes out with a product and says, this is a med bed and it'll cure anything, then I would expect to see 90 to 100% of the people who have tried it to have that result before I'm willing to put my money on the line and my time to investigate it further or to try it or to buy it and use it in my own environment. And, the product that I'm thinking of, which I'm not going to mention the name, I'm sure everybody knows what it is. I've read the reviews of people. And what I do see 90 to 100% of the time is people have a very relaxing experience. And some of them have had, some metaphysical kinds of experiences or upliftment or whatever. But it's a med bed. So if it's a med bed, I expect that 90 to 100% of those people have been 100% healed of every illness that they have, and they walk away in this perfect health condition. And that has not been the case. So again, as I said earlier, I look for the facts that I can prove. And if I've even read some reviews where people have said they went there expecting a lot and, well, they had a nice nap, but nothing else. So this is what I look at to evaluate these things. And so I think, well, something that gives me a nice nap isn't worth $20,000 or $50,000 or whatever it costs, unless I'm really having a hard time taking a nap, and that's what they're selling. So that's where I think we have to evaluate things. Is there's going to be a lot of new technologies that are coming out in the decades ahead, and we can throw away our money needlessly on things that don't actually do what they say they do, unless we can take a critical mind to each of those things and really evaluate without allowing our belief systems to convince us that it's doing something that it's not. If we take the belief system out, whether I believe it's a med bed or not, if I remove my belief system, it should prove itself to do what a med bed is supposed to do. Does it do that? That's a perfectly logical way to approach it. If it does not do that, then it's not a med bed. Maybe it's a good nap bed, but it's not a med bed, right? And I think that's what we need to. Now, there are other things which you're going to discuss as well that I think are relevant ways to evaluate these technologies to see if they really are things that we should get involved in.
Yeah, I'm a connoisseur of spiritual devices. I definitely have my fair share, and they are not cheap. They are an investment. So, I do look at the studies because many of them do have studies. I don't think we can go 100% in terms of looking at that because we have to consider, any study can be set up to show something favorable, in the way of touting technology. But from my perspective, a lot of the biofield devices and the frequency devices that are on the market right now have pretty solid, studies behind them. Even some of the light therapies, not all of them, but some of them that I use do. But you're talking about the MedBed-ish device. We've been having some discussion in my inner circle community and on Facebook about this. And, this is where I think spiritual or intuition and mental processing need to kind of interface, and we don't have to jump to conclusions. And I think that's, again, something that's so prominent in this timeline is we're all apt to quickly take sides and to jump in or jump out 100%. But what I noticed about this particular technology, and you and I actually talked about this when it first came out, is there's some kind of strange interaction here from people, groups, families that I wouldn't consider very benevolent, like the Rockefellers, academia like the Royal Society, that we know are on the wrong side of things, even some NIH funding. And for me, as a rational human being, knowing what the NIH is all about and what they've been focused on the last couple of years, to put that money into something that should be more spiritually advanced, to me, it just is a complete and total miss. So it doesn't mean that I've decided it's a bad thing. But there's enough red flags there for me as a conscious human being who wants so desperately for medbed technology and for profound healing for all of humanity to stand back and observe and to wait. Because I know that all of the information that I need, that we all need, is always going to come to light. It just doesn't come to light right off the bat. So I think this is where taking a critical, more physical eye to something as opposed to a more spiritually focused evaluation is really super important, because if we do have malevolent focus, not saying we do, but if we do, in some type of a light therapy like that, that could be focused on our DNA, our cells, our nervous system. It's the last thing that as a spiritual community we want to be jumping in the pool with. And so for me personally, I always sit back and observe, and I watch, look at the results and the reviews of the people, but also where's the funding coming from? Who's got their hands in this? It's sometimes hard to tell with the people who are creating these devices and things, but if there's not a lot of information about them online, I'm always very skeptical. So,
Yeah, I mean, so many people, I mean, I don't know how many, but I know a fair number of people who have purchased those devices that are 10, 20,000 plus
they're
dollars, right?
upwards,
Yeah,
yes,
upwards
of
of that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens when the fad passes and it goes away and people realize it really isn't as amazing as it is? Now, if it was a real med bed, they'd have people lined for miles trying to get in to use the thing, and everybody'd want to buy one. So, because if a real med bed existed, everybody'd want to have it if they could
Right.
possibly afford it, right? And so, if you don't look into these things with more of rational thought, then you may end up spending a lot of money on something that ends up being just a really expensive paperweight down the line.
Right.
And
Yeah, I just want to interject and say, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that what we're seeing is the interface between a more conventional and pharmaceutical model where that money comes from and an advanced alternative healing technique. I'm not sure we're there yet. And personally, what the guides have told me is that we're really moving in a whole new direction. And I think we can see that, the implosion of the medical model, for certain things. I mean, obviously, if I break a leg tomorrow, I'm going to go have it set in a cast. But in terms of healing an autoimmune condition or cancer, we're really moving into more advanced and conscious ways of healing. So are we there yet in terms of the more, alternative modalities and technologies? I think there are some out there that are very helpful. But in terms of instantaneous manifestation of like a healed chronic illness, that I have not seen yet.
right.
Yeah.
And your comment about Rockefeller Foundation, the NIH, and the Royal Society. These are three institutions that are heavily invested in pharmaceutical.
Mm-hmm.
So what interest could they possibly have in a technology that eliminates the need for vaccines or medical care of any kind?
Right.
So if this med bed really worked, why would they be supporting it or even funding it? Because then they'd go out of business. All their companies, NIH is based on vaccine proliferation and research. So if they were supporting that, it wouldn't make sense. In the past, if something actually worked, they would usually get rid of it, buy the patent and put it on a shelf and not anybody else touch it. So the fact that they're financing these things and supporting these things should be enough evidence to show that the product can't possibly work in the way that they're promising. Because if it did, and maybe it's even doing harm, otherwise, why would they be involved in it? So these are skepticisms that I would have when I evaluate things as to whether or not they legitimately are doing what they say, especially when big dollars are involved.
Yeah. I look at it this way. It's in today's world and in the spiritual community, there's a lot of philosophy about, not looking at the problem. Don't look at the evil. We're heart-centered beings. We want good things for the world. So it's easy for us to jump on board with things that seem really good. And maybe this is. But at the same time, I think that is a program in and of itself. So we're taught to always look at the positive, to never look at the negative. And our vibration is going to be impacted in all of this. And I think how convenient is that to be teaching a program where spiritual beings, conscious beings, are not looking at the problems, not looking at the darkness. We're developing the energetic bandwidth to be able to see both light and dark and use it to our advantage to create a path of more light. Because how will we be able to discern and to make really valuable choices for ourselves and our families unless we see both sides of it, unless we're really willing to look in that direction so that we know which one to take?
Since we're on the subject of technology, I wanted to address a question that I get a lot of times on previous shows, which is what kind of equipment do I use to test different things? Now, I use a lot of different devices for different kinds of things, and even for EMF and frequency radiation, there are a couple of different meters that I use. This particular one I'm going to demonstrate today, just briefly, not get into it in depth, is just a very entry-level EMF and frequency radiation tester. And it's called the EMF 390 by GQ. It's a company. So this will test electromagnetic radiation as well as frequency radiation. So electromagnetic radiation might be like the power in the walls or your electric car, for example, where the frequency radiation would be things like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and so on. So it does test both. And now I should say we're sitting in a room right now because of all the studio equipment. There's a lot of radiation in this room. We have a lot of Bluetooth devices that are running and Wi-Fi devices as well. So the radiation in this room at the moment is a little bit higher than you'd ordinarily have in a space. So I'm going to try to demonstrate this. Now the meter has a little bit of an audible function, which I'm going to leave on just so you get the idea, but it's going to beep regardless of what I do because the room has a lot of radiation in it. But I'm going to turn it on, and just to illustrate the difference between, and this is, I'm going to try to maybe hold it in a place where the EMF isn't so high, but the difference between using things like shungite, for example, to condition space versus using something to block. So I know in the spiritual community, we tend to use things like shungite or other kinds of devices, like those little decals that go on our cell phones that claim that they block the electromagnetic radiation. But a quick way if it really blocks it is, well, if it really actually blocked the electromagnetic or frequency radiation, your phone wouldn't work. If somebody tried to call you or text you, you wouldn't receive it because the signal wouldn't be able to go out or come in. Like a Faraday cage, if you put it inside a Faraday cage or a Faraday cloth, which I have here, it will prevent the phone from ringing, but it also does block the radiation. And there's a difference between that and using different kinds of stones like shungite, for example, which shungite will not block electromagnetic radiation, but it will cause you to condition the environment so that it is safer for you to be there. For example, if you wear it, it may condition your energy field so that even though the radiation is there in the room with you, it's not going to be affecting you in any sort of an adverse way. So we have to make that distinction. And, not everybody has testing devices, so it's easy to not know this information because most of us may not have access to devices to actually be able to make that more of a rational, level-headed decision in that area. So I wanted to illustrate the point just to show you. Now, at the moment, this meter is showing several different readings for electromagnetic radiation as well as frequency radiation. And because, as I said, there's a lot of radiation in this room right now, it is showing a high reading compared to what I would normally get in this environment if I turned all those things off. But what I want to show you is now this has an audible function turned on, which you won't be able to see the meter readings from that far away. But I have a cell phone here, and it's on airplane mode right now, so it's not really. But even in airplane mode, just the electromagnetic radiation on this is causing the meter to beep. Now, let me just turn on the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi on this phone, and we can see now, you can't see probably on screen, but the numbers on the screen have increased significantly higher, and the meter is beeping at a faster pace, which is showing that the radiation coming off the phone is a lot higher. Now, if I move it away from the phone, the meter stops beeping because the radiation has dropped. If I move it back to the phone, it starts beeping again. And so this is a very level-headed, rational way to test whether or not radiation is in the room. Now, as I said before, if you use certain kinds of technology, you can block the radiation, and certain kinds of technology will condition the space or your physical body or your aura so that it doesn't affect you as much. So now we have the phone here, which I was showing you, and let me just make sure it's on, and it's beeping. Now, if I were to put the phone inside this electromagnetic fabric, or rather blocking fabric, it will change the meter reading, because now the meter or the radiation from the phone is being blocked. Now I've got it wrapped in here in not a very great way, but still just to illustrate the point. Now if I put the meter on there, it's still reading higher than you would get in this space because of all the other electronics in the room that are running. But as you can see, the phone no longer is making the meter beep. So the radiation is significantly less than it was a few minutes ago. So this is a way for us to be able to evaluate the difference between what's blocked and what's conditioned. And I think that's something that we have to take a look at. If I were to, and as I said, if I had shungite in this room, I would demonstrate with that. In a future show, I'll do a more thorough explanation with demonstrations when the other studio is finished. But for right now, I just wanted to give you it's a very simple explanation. Now, Micheila, who is very much into technology, has a lot of devices that are made for different kinds of treatments. And so she has a device here that's called an NES. And the NES actually has a program built into it to, what does it do exactly?
It creates a field. You can either put it on your skin and on the body, and it's working with your biofield to shift the vibration and the energy of your biofield. So it's sending information into your energy field. The setting I have it on now is creating a field around you to prevent
Right.
the cell phone radiation.
Okay. So, and you notice a difference, right, when you wear this?
I like it.
Use it, rather?
I use it for, it has a million different settings, so it's not just,
Right.
that's just a small portion of what it does. But yeah, absolutely. I'm a believer in that and love it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Micheila has validated this works for her in the years that she's had it and used it for various things. So we have no reason to believe that the electromagnetic setting on here would not work. But let's see. So if I have this next to me, in theory, it's conditioning this space to so that electromagnetic and frequency radiation isn't affecting me. But as you can see, I have this device, and the meter is still beeping that is picking up radiation from this phone. So what we can determine from that is, well, either the device doesn't work, or the device isn't designed to block radiation, because it's definitely not blocking the radiation. It's still coming off the phone. The meter's still reading that it's coming off the phone. But what the device is doing is it's conditioning the space so that the environment that I'm in is more beneficial to me, even though the radiation may be present. So if you run a device like that, similar to shungite, it may create a blanket of energy or different frequency that your body can attune to, thereby sort of neutralizing, let's say, the electromagnetic radiation, so that even though it's there, you can be sitting in a soup of radiation, but it may not be having an adverse effect on you. And that's the distinction that I think we should make when we're evaluating these different things. We can't necessarily always believe that just because somebody sells a sticker for our phone to get rid of radiation, that it actually works. Maybe it works, but we have to have some way to validate whether or not it really is working. Now, if it's an inexpensive sticker, it doesn't matter. But if it's a $1,000 or $5,000 device and that's, expensive for you, then it may not be something that should be purchased without doing a bit more research and into whether or not it works or how it is actually working. So this is just a simple explanation of the difference between, that I talked about in a previous show, blocking radiation and and actually conditioning the space so that the radiation doesn't affect you. It's kind of like if you're in an environment where there's a lot of nuclear radiation, you could take certain foods or supplements or iodine, or we talked about miso, I think, before, right? That may allow you to be in that space without having as much an adverse effect on your body. The radiation may still be there, but your body may not be affected by it. And that's a difference between blocking something versus conditioning your environment or your body or your energy field so that it can be in that environment without being as affected. So just some food for thought on that topic, so that everyone can understand with an actual visual example of how those things work.
Yeah, I think that's a great demonstration to kind of sum up all of the things we've been talking about here, because in the timeline that we're in, I think we have to work both sides of it. We have to consider the vibrational piece and take advantage of everything that we can to use for our biofield, for our energy field, to support our consciousness against all of these things, whether they be frequency, things that are kind of intangible, or toxins, material, metals, all of those things. Working both sides of it include that we use technologies like this, but we also take fasts. And that's what we do in my house. We turn the Wi-Fi off at night. The phone stays out of my bedroom while I'm sleeping. So I get that, 8-9 hours where there is nothing close to my head. I think all that stuff is just important for us to remember as we move into this new dimension that we're all creating simultaneously. And I personally like to support the things that I'm in resonance with. And we're all different beings with different sensitivities and different needs. So we can't really measure necessarily, even though it's got some great science and support around it in terms of the biofield, on a day-to-day basis, what's that actually doing? We can't rationally measure that. But as a sensitive, I can certainly feel it. And so I enjoy supporting developers, researchers, those that are doing, creating new technology, so that we can have the foundation for it as we move into this new age. I think that's extremely important, because the guides always say we don't create from nothingness. So the more that we are actively pursuing the things that work for us, the more those things are going to grow into things that work for everyone.
Thank you all for joining us for another Awaken Empowered podcast. I hope you enjoyed the topics we discussed today. And if you have any questions, you can post it in the comments, and we will go through those in a future show where we take Q&A. So next week we'll have another Channel Revelation show, and then hopefully sometime in the near future we'll be doing some of our usual Flower of Life live events, where if you are on Facebook, you can ask us those questions, or ask Micheila those questions live, or for me and Barb as well. And Barb will be joining us again soon also. So thanks again. We'll see you soon.